Welcome, everyone. My name is Bill Brown, and I'm the Assistant Director for Strategy and Engagement for the IU Environmental Resilience Institute. This is the second webinar in the series that's putting together by the Indiana Resilience Funding Hub, which is a new entity. This is a collaboration between the Environmental Resilience Institute and the Center for Rural Engagement, represented today by Jacob Simpson, who will act as our moderator. Hi, Jacob. And our special guest today is Jamie Wilson, a business program specialist for USDA-Rural Development. She has been with the agency for 20 years and is the state energy coordinator for Indiana. Jamie's area of focus is the Rural Energy for America program, which is the topic of this webinar, otherwise known as REAP, and servicing the whole state of Indiana. She has a professional goal of striving to add a little bit of down-to-earth dialogue to an otherwise complicated program. So we're looking forward to that. Next slide, please. So we will hear from Jamie on this exciting program and how you might take advantage of it. We'll do a brief overview of that program and then also a little bit about the Indiana Resilience Funding Hub, if you're not familiar. And then also the important piece here is you will have an opportunity to post questions in the chat, and Jacob can help us pick the ones that are most interesting. And so we hopefully will have a lot of time at the end to answer your questions. So with that, next slide. Just want to say a little bit about the Hub. The Hub's mission is to augment the capacity of rural communities to successfully apply for federal resilience funding for local projects. We want to strengthen community collaborations and the partners that are already there. We want to engage IU faculty and students to provide technical support and professional development opportunities. And we want to provide tools, data, resources, training, and guides for people who are looking to take advantage of this opportunity. Next slide, please. And with that, I will turn it over to Jamie.
Great, thank you so much. As it was mentioned, I'm the REAP Energy Coordinator for Indiana. I've been working in the REAP program for about 10 years, but have been with the agency for a little over 20 now. My main focus is REAP. So that stands for Renewable Energy for America program, but at the government, we like the whole alphabet soup, so we call it REAP. Next slide, please. REAP is for agricultural producers or rural small businesses. An agricultural producer is somebody that has more than 50% of their income derived from agricultural production. A small business, we use the SBA's definition for small business. That is either defined by using the NAICS code, which can be in annual receipts or employees. So depending on a business's NAICS code kind of depends on what parameter they need to fall within. For REAP, nonprofits are not eligible unless they're specific 501c12. Next slide, please. Here's some things that we can do with REAP. We can do energy efficiency improvements and we can do renewable energy. As long as it's commercially available technology, we do not do research and development. There are numerous things that we can do with REAP as long as it saves or generates energy. While it may save a business or an ag producer money, in the end, it has to save energy to be eligible for REAP. Next slide, please. Here's some things that are eligible project cost and ineligible project cost. Equipment, anything that it basically takes to get that project up and running and off the ground and working. We can't do things like lines of credit, no lease payments. Any costs incurred prior to us receiving a completed application are ineligible. Next slide, please. For REAP, it's gone through some massive changes in the last few months. It used to be a 25% grant, and then with the Inflation Reduction Act funding, it went to a 40% grant. However, April 1st, it is now a 50% grant. So we can do up to 50% of the total project cost. We do have minimums and maximums with REAP, depending on the type of project you're doing, depends on the minimum and maximum grants. But as you'll see here, we can do very small grants and we can do quite large grants. While the maximum grant request for renewable is $1 million, that does not have to be the 50% of the total project cost. You could have a $5 million project and still only ask for the 1 million max. So we can do small, medium, and large projects. Next slide, please. Now I've got a few examples of some of the projects that REAP as a whole, not necessarily in Indiana, has been a part of funding. Just to give you guys a little bit of variety here, we're going to start with energy efficiency improvements. This, as an example, was a chicken farm. They wanted radiant heat, fans, vents, and computerized controls. Computerized controls help save a lot of energy. So as you'll see, the total project cost, the REAP grant, they got a loan for the other remaining. These projects were with the 25%, so keep that in mind. So, and it also tells you basically the result of the project: improved egg production, reduced time and labor, and saved energy. Next slide, please. We've got a rural manufacturer, a grocery store. The manufacturer did lighting. That is an eligible REAP cost. The grocery store, energy efficient cooler doors, saved a lot of money, saved a lot of energy. And a lot of times with these smaller grocery stores, energy costs are quite substantial. So any little bit can help. Next slide, please. Grocery stores, local mom and pop grocery stores, again, save big money with REAP projects. Geothermal heat, energy efficiency lighting, 40% reduction in energy cost. That is huge for small communities and small businesses. Veterinary hospital, so we're on to renewable energy now. This was for solar on top of the roof, which especially local communities may have space restraints, so sometimes using that roof is pretty nice. Total project cost $148.50, $20,000 REAP grant, 30 to 40% reduction in operating expenses. It's got a pretty good payback. So solar is huge in Indiana specifically. Next slide, please. Dairy farms, digesters. We've seen an increase in digesters in Indiana in the last few years. It is a major project, quite large. Like you see here, $4.15 million for a project cost, $1,000 REAP grant, and they had a REAP loan. REAP can be a loan also if you're interested. Almost everybody's interested in the grant, so that's kind of my main focus. But we do also do loans and combinations, grant loan. Next slide, please. How do you get started? You give me a call. My contact information is there. My email address is there, or you can go to that website. That is the REAP website. Any forms that you need will be listed under that link under the To Apply tab. We do have different projects for different project cost or different applications for project cost. Applications are accepted all year round for REAP, but depending on when you get your application in, depends on when you will compete for funds. However, we accept them all year round. So feel free to reach out to me at that email, that phone number, if you have any questions. And I think that's all I have.
Bill, I think you're muted.
It might be better if I'm muted. We'll come back to Jamie in a moment with questions. If you would, please put your questions for Jamie in the chat and we'll answer as many of those as we can. The Indiana Resilience Funding Hub is also available to help you if you decide to apply for a REAP grant and you feel like you need some assistance with that. We are happy to help. You'll find on our website that we also have some technical resources available that explain some of these grant programs in more detail. Next slide, please. So on our website, you can get there with the QR code or the short link, but you can also sign up to collaborate with us in that contact form that's available there, and we can get back to you and find out what you need assistance with. So if we go back to Jamie's slide, contact slide. Jamie, I'll start the questions. What is the competitive nature of this, and what are the upcoming deadlines that people should know about?
Sure, that's a great question. In Indiana, and I can only basically speak for the competitiveness in Indiana, it is extremely competitive. This last fiscal year, I had $4.4 million in grant funding, and I had $7.3 million in request. So it's quite competitive. And basically everything's based on score. It is a score-driven program. So it doesn't matter if you're the first application to get submitted or the last. Everyone has the same opportunity. And it's ranked from highest to lowest scoring funded applications. And I fund them until I run out of money. So that's kind of how that works. It used to be there was 2 deadlines for REAP per year, but now we are going to quarterly competitions. So the next deadline is June 30th. People always want to know how soon after that will I know if I get funded? It really depends. Applications, once they're submitted in a fiscal year's competition, they will go on to compete for funding until they're either funded or we run out of money. So if it's not funded in the first round, it will go on to the next eligible round. So it could possibly be a while. But once an application is submitted, I send a letter that says I have your application submitted, it's complete. You may start your project without a funding guarantee at that point. That's completely up to the applicant. So they don't have to wait to find out if they get funded. They just have to wait till they have that letter from me saying their application is complete. So while it may be a while to find out if you get funded or not, you can go ahead and do the project regardless.
Thank you. Jacob, do you see some other questions in the chat?
Yes. So there's another question about if there are annual caps on the grants in a given area of the state per year, or if it's just Indiana as a whole.
Sure. The pot of money I have is for Indiana as a whole. It is not separated out into counties. It's just Indiana gets a certain allocation, and when we use it, we use it. Typically, we use all of our allocation, and sometimes we even use national office funding. So when the states, not Indiana, because we always use ours, but when other states don't use their money, those funds get pooled. National office takes them and they put them into one big pot of money. And then they look at any remaining unfunded applications throughout the whole country, and they see who they can fund from that pot of money. So that's kind of how that works.
Okay. And then going back to the scoring criteria, you know, I'm sure folks need to look through the application to get the details about how the scoring works. But is there any kind of preview you can provide about how the scoring is structured, and if there are certain criteria that are more important than others to folks' scores, and how someone might position their project to be more successful among those criteria?
Yeah, definitely. As of April 1st, with the increased grant amounts, they are looking into completing a new score sheet. So while I can't speak to the new score sheet, I can reference the ones that we've had historically, and they've been quite similar. So I feel confident enough to say that the low-hanging fruit is probably going to be the same. My opinion, the main category is, have you ever been funded with this program before? If not, then you get the maximum points in that category. So that's kind of important. It keeps people from coming back to the well year after year. However, if you have been funded before, that's okay. If it's been in the previous 2 fiscal years, you get 0 points in that category. But if it's been longer than 2 years, you get some points in that category. So you're not completely penalized, but you don't get the maximum either. Do you have the funds to do the project on hand? We call that matching funds. So if you've got the proof, whether it's in the form of a bank statement or a commitment from a lender saying that you've got the funds secured for this project, you get the maximum points. If you only have a certain percentage of those funds secured, you still get some points, but it's not going to be the full point in that category. So that's kind of important. We have also had a category for low-hanging fruit for being an existing business. You got points for doing that, which kind of prevented some startup businesses just from coming in and saying, hey, we're going to do this solar generation project and we're going to run with it. And it's going to generate a lot of energy. So it's going to score well. So as long as you've been an existing business, you've got the funds committed, and you've never been funded with REAP before, those are the major takeaways. The other ones was depending on how much energy it saved or generated in relation to the total project cost and how much grant money we're asking for. Historically, if you were asking for over $250,000 for a REAP grant, you got penalized in that scoring category. So that helped try to keep the grant requests a little bit lower. And I hope that's going to be the same going forward, but I don't know about that one.
It's really helpful. And one other question in the chat was whether or not REAP, so those matching funds, could those matching funds be made up of other federal funding, or can federal funds not be used as matching dollars?
Yes and no. So it can be a little tricky. With REAP, we have to make sure federal funds do not exceed the maximum allowable percentage. And with REAP, since federal funds can be up to 50%, if you were looking for a 50% loan, the answer or grant, the answer would be no. If you were looking for a 25% REAP grant, then you could have up to 25% of other federal dollars being contributed to go towards your match. But if you're looking for the full 50% in REAP grant, then the answer is no.
Someone also asked if this Q&A and webinar will be recorded and posted on the website, and yes, the webinar and Q&A will be posted, so you can refer to this later. So someone else asked, what do interest rates look like for low interest loans? I don't know if you can address that, but
I can't specifically, because the loans for REAP are a guaranteed loan. So you have a lender on board already, and the lender applies to us on your behalf. Rates and terms are determined by the lender, and as long as they're reasonable and customary, we won't balk at it.
Gotcha. And then there's another question asking about who should someone use for energy audit estimates, measurements to support applications.
Okay, that's kind of trickier depending on the project exactly. If it's solar, you can use things like NREL or PV watts, especially if you're doing a smaller scale project. Those can be done by yourself. But once you get over the $80,000 threshold, those energy assessments need to be done by a qualified energy assessor. And there are several throughout the state. I know Hoosier Energy and in Bloomington area, they do energy audits and assessments. You might be able to even check with, Purdue University. They might have somebody on staff that can do it. I can't recommend anyone, but there are several people out there depending on the project.
Great. You spoke to the application windows, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but can you also remind me if someone receives the grant, what is the grant period
Sure.
for implementing the project?
Sure. Once an application is selected for funding, they'll have 2 years to use the money.
And then a lot of the grant programs coming out of the IRA and, bipartisan infrastructure law are encouraging partnerships and things like that. For this program, however, it sounds like in the scoring criteria, there isn't a need necessarily for community-based partnerships or letters of support or things like that. It's mainly focused on, an individual business or an individual agricultural producer. Is that correct, or do you have any qualifications to that?
That is correct. With REAP, it's not based on any partnerships. Now, we do have a community programs that they might have something similar to REAP, however, it is not REAP. They can do more community type projects, but unfortunately with business programs, we're kind of individualized.
And then we have another question asking if you can talk a little bit about independent third party feasibility studies for projects over 200,000.
Yes, feasibility studies used to be required for total project costs of 200,000 and more. However, they are not required anymore unless the agency deems it so. Typically, for solar especially, they would be required for energy efficiency projects. So if you're having a grain dryer, as an example, a feasibility study would be required. But for solar or renewable, unless it's a digester, I should say, but solar feasibility studies aren't required unless we can say, hey, this is a brand new startup business. They don't have historical energy use. So prove to me that this project is actually feasible. It's got market feasibility. It's technically feasible. Everything is going to flow with this project. And those are only for the bigger projects. For a small project, they're not required.
Great. Well, I'll do one last call for questions if people want to put them in the chat. But Bill, is there anything else you can think of to ask about the REAP program?
If you would push the slides forward a couple, I could talk about something else while people are maybe composing their last few questions. We do have some approaching dates and deadlines. We are going to have another webinar on June 1st, leveraging federal resources through state programs with the Indiana Finance Authority. I think this would be of great interest for communities. May 31st is a deadline for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant application for metropolitan areas. June 1st is the deadline for the USDA Urban and Community Forestry Grant applications. And July 10th is the Department of Transportation Safe Streets for All deadline for planning and implementation grants. So if you have any questions about any of those, please let us know, and we'll be happy to get back to you and try to answer your questions.
Well, we don't have any other questions in the chat, but Jamie, is there anything else you would like to say to wrap up?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway is if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We are, kind of the boots on the ground for this program. So we're here for you. If you have any questions, you can call, you can email, you can come in to the office. Unfortunately, I'm kind of the one that handles this program for the whole state, but there are several offices around the state that if you needed to send me some paperwork, you needed to fax it to me, we can make concessions. Don't feel like you have to do this all on your own. And I do have a list of people that I've compiled that have submitted successful applications to us in the recent history. They can help you fill out an application. I can't recommend anyone, I can't say that enough. I can't recommend anyone, but I would feel confident in this list of people that they can help you. So have any questions, please ask. The answer will always be no if you don't ask.
And Jamie, knowing how busy you must be covering the whole state of Indiana, we really appreciate you spending the time with us today to talk about this important program.
Thank
And
you.
glad to have you. And Jacob, if you would advance to the last slide. I also want to reiterate that if you are thinking about applying for a REAP grant and you feel like you could use some help with that, that's what we're here for. We are here to serve, and we have some people who are grant experts that can help you track down the data and the details you need. So between us and USDA and Jamie, we should be able to help you achieve some success in this program. So again, thank you for attending our webinar today. Please pass the word to people you think might be interested in this, and let them know that we will be posting this webinar with the Q&A and everything else included.